Someone Like You by Sparkypasker. Read by Distracted by Books. Chapter 3. When he woke up in the morning, Izuku got onto his computer and started to look for a part-time job. He found one at a nearby cafe. He filled out the application online, then printed it out to take in. When Izuku walked into the cafe, he found a long counter stretching from one side of the building to the other, a cooler separating the register area from the pickup. At the opposite end of the counter from the register sat three counter seats. The cafe front, from a wide window lined with five booths, so every customer sat there could watch the world pass by. It was after the morning rush, so the barista, a young lady with irregularly cut short black hair, was cleaning the counters and coffee machines. Izuku noticed she also had a mutation that caused the lobes of her ears to resemble the jacks on a set of headphones. "Hi, can I help you?" she asked. "Hello, I have an application to turn in," Izuku responded. As if summoned, an older woman with graying hair, secured low to her neck, came out of a doorway along the back wall, behind the counter. Izuku could only assume it led to a kitchen, based on the fact that there were pastries and small plates in the case, but no oven to be seen. The woman yanked the application out of Izuku's hand and looked it over. "Follow me," she said curtly. Izuku stepped past the swinging door built into the counter and followed the woman into the kitchen. Inside, Izuku saw a pristine kitchen with shining countertops and appliances. The woman, who Izuku assumed to be either the owner or manager, or both, walked to another door located near the back of the shop. When Izuku stepped inside, he saw a large desk with a computer, desktop calendar, and ledgers. A few filing cabinets and artwork lined the walls of the office. "Sit down." Izuku sat down in the chair opposite the owner. "This will be your interview." "Okay." Izuku did not expect to have an interview right away. The suddenness caused his heart rate to skyrocket and his palms to sweat. He never was good with authority figures. The owner sat in her own chair, then took Izuku's application and shredded it. Izuku was stunned. "What makes you think you can do this job?" "I am a hard worker and I'm good with people." The general answer to any question like that. The woman gave a non-committal hum. She began typing on her computer. "It says here you're quirkless." "That's right." Izuku said, face blank. "I noticed you didn't disclose it on your application." "I didn't feel it was relevant to the position." "Regardless, all quirks or lack thereof must be disclosed in the event it becomes a liability down the line. By not having a quirk, it's impossible for it to become a liability. I could end up going out of business because of you." Izuku had nothing to say to that. He was beginning to think, not for the first time since he stepped foot into the cafe, that this was a bad idea. Maybe he should look for a job elsewhere. The owner bent down to look under the desk. She sighed in resignation at the sight of Izuku's red shoes. "Fine, you're hired, on probation. The job should be easy enough that even someone like you should be able to handle it. Your probation period will be 30 days. If you miss a day of work, break anything, or cause me to lose business in any way, you will be fired immediately. That means you must stay behind the counter. No one can see your shoes. You will address me by boss. You don't need to know anything more than that." Izuku was stunned. That was not the direction he figured this conversation was going. It wasn't the best conditions, but he would have to deal with it. He smiled stiffly. "Yes, ma'am." She glared at him. "I mean, boss." She nodded once. "You will start tomorrow after school. Enter through the alley in the back. No one can see those shoes of yours," boss said, with her nose scrunched up in disgust. Izuku retraced his footsteps and left the office after giving boss copies of his legal documents. The young lady looked at Izuku as he left the kitchen. "So, you got the job?" Yeah," Izuku said, a little unsure. "Ah, so you got to experience her warm welcome." "I guess you could say that." "Well, welcome aboard. I'm Jiro Kyoka." She held out her hand. Izuku reluctantly placed his hand in hers and shook it. Midoriya, Izuku. I look forward to working with you. Izuku entered the apartment he shared with Inko. She sat on the couch in the living room, reading a book. Izuku couldn't see the cover from where he was standing, but he would bet it was a science fiction novel. One thing Izuku reluctantly admits he got from her was his taste in books. I got a job today, he told her. Okay. Make sure not to cause them any trouble. I won't, he says, then retreats to his room. He needed to do some homework. Not his school homework. No, he always does that at school and hands it in right away. The material's always stuff he learned years ago, so it only takes him a few minutes to complete. Not that it mattered in the end. The school in general had an unwritten policy when it came to quirkless students. Every test, every quiz, every assignment was given a 70%. A perfectly average score. Because the quirkless kid couldn't get a higher score than that. They weren't smart enough. The school figured it was a win-win for them. The second his work came across their desk, they didn't even have to waste a second to grade it. Just slap a 70 on it, then go on to the next one. Saves their teachers time grading, saves quirkless kids a good grade, and it prevented the school from submitting bad scores to the Department of Education. Ever since Izuku discovered this occurring, when he was in elementary school, he would teach himself in his free time. He figured he was probably already through at least half of the high school curriculum by now. But he was taking his time after all, digging a little deeper into each subject than would probably be taught by teachers. He liked to be able to see the whole picture. Izuku tried his hand at some advanced calculus, but it couldn't keep his attention. All he could do and think about was his job. About how he told Inko he got it, but didn't tell her he was only going to be working Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday. How he bought a membership to a gym with the little extra yen he had hidden in the loose floorboard of his closet and would be going there on Tuesday, and was currently looking for a self-defense or martial arts course for Thursday. Sundays would be spent learning police procedures, first aid, public relations, and making menu plans. He would also learn any other subject he could think of. Izuku decided to put aside his homeschool work for now and started to make this week's menu. He needed to make sure to include plenty of protein and carbohydrates and to limit excess fats, oils, and simple sugars. He took the menu out to the living room and gave it to Inko. Here's this week's menu. The portion sizes will be normal at first, but I expect them to get larger as I increase my activity. Once that happens, I can give you the money for the extra food. Inko looked over the menu in her hand and nodded. Okay, I will follow this. And who knows, it may even help me lose a few kilograms. Learning to eat healthier would be good, even if you do give up the silly crime-fighting thing. Izuku nodded and forced a closed-mouthed smile. It wasn't worth arguing with her. This was not just some thing, some phase. This was a career he was making. I believe we have the ingredients to make this first one tonight, but I will have to go to the store tomorrow for the rest. Come help me make supper. I don't think we have made some of these items lately. We will need to make sure you remember how to cook it, so you can do it on your own if I have to go out with coworkers or something one night. Izuku sighed quietly, followed her into the kitchen. He knew what that meant. He would be the one cooking, and she would stand behind him and critiquing every little action he made in the kitchen. Izuku loathed the fact that he had to rely on Inko for funds. If he had enough of his own money, he wouldn't have to depend on Inko to go grocery shopping. He couldn't wait until he could live on his own. He had a feeling it would be a while before that would happen. Inko wouldn't let him leave until at least he paid back whatever debts she thought he had. After Izuku finished cooking and the two of them ate, he went back to his room. For the rest of the night, he researched some low-impact exercises to do during the school day. He had to physically go to school, but since he never really learned anything, it was just wasted time. He wanted to get something out of having to go there. Yoga was his next task. He figured it would be a good way to stay flexible while gaining muscle. For the rest of the night, Izuku practiced the yoga poses, making sure that he had a baseline for what he could do and what he couldn't. He documented everything in his crime-fighting notebook. He found the yoga soothing. The research into yoga led to meditation. Izuku was a little skeptical about it, but he tried it. He didn't even realize how tense he was, or how much ran through his mind, even when he wasn't actively thinking. He had never been more relaxed. Izuku took that feeling with him as he fell into a dreamless sleep. Chapter 4. Something must have been in the air when Izuku returned to school the next day. He was actually left alone, for the most part. Really, the most that happened was other students purposely bumping into him. Izuku was usually able to keep a hold of his books, but there were a few times they were forced out of his hands. That was usually followed by the textbooks being kicked further down the hallway, and of course this resulted in him spending more time finding and picking up his materials and made him slightly late for class. The teachers would either ignore him or scowl at him. They rarely did much else, claiming that it took up too much of their valuable time to care about if Izuku was there or not. After one of these particular classes, Izuku was asked to hang back after class. He walked up to the teacher's desk and stood silently, waiting for them to acknowledge his existence. This particular teacher was notoriously known for holding a particularly petty grudge against Izuku. This stemmed from him actually grading his work a few times. He couldn't believe Izuku had gotten all the answers correct, and spent nearly a month trying to figure out how Izuku was cheating, quote unquote. Needless to say, he was never able to find anything. That didn't stop the teacher from trying to, quote, trip him up occasionally by giving him work well beyond what the rest of the class was learning, or giving Izuku guidelines far more strict than his classmates were assigned. When they realized nothing they were doing was getting the results they were looking for, they took to wasting Izuku's time and punishing him for the slightest imagined infraction instead. If Izuku spoke or moved while waiting to be acknowledged, he was being distracting. He had gotten so much detention over the years. So this whole song and dance of standing perfectly still and waiting for them to finish grading the papers they were working on was nothing new. In fact, Izuku thought maybe this would be a good chance to work on his meditation. He couldn't move or do anything anyways, so he may as well get some benefit out of having to stand there. After about half an hour, the teacher finally put away the last of their paperwork and looked at Izuku. The sudden change in movement pulled Izuku back from the precipice of enlightenment, or at least that was what it felt like. And when your brain is constantly buzzing, even when you aren't trying to think about anything, having it cleared, damn feels near like finding God. The only thing that was incredibly difficult for Izuku to actually shut off his brain. He had only been able to achieve it a total of one time, and he was already addicted. He was going to have to look up other meditation methods. Maybe the one he had been using was wrong for him in one way or another. So, I saw that you turned in a new post-graduation form, the teacher said, his fingers crossed and sitting on the desk in front of him. That's right, Izuku replied. The teacher hummed. I guess you finally realized there's no way someone like you is going to be a hero. I'm glad you are being more realistic. Maybe we should give a medal to whomever it was that finally beat it into your thick head of yours. He gave a mocking smile. Izuku didn't say anything in response. Nothing he said was going to be taken seriously anyway. He would just be punished for saying anything in his defense. He saw no choice but to stand there and take whatever vitriol spewed from his teacher's mouth. Every word cracked against Izuku's defenses. Normally, anything they said just slid off his back, never bothering him much. He supposed that was what happened when you heard it so often. But today, after what Izuku had learned, he wanted to fight back, to put the people in this school in their place. He bit the inside of his lip to keep quiet. If he said anything, made even a single sound, he would be put into detention for the rest of his time in this god-forsaken school. He would end up being fired from his job. Inko would guarantee he be put on house arrest. There would be absolutely no way he would be able to become a crime fighter anytime soon, and Izuku couldn't wait. If he waited any longer, he would be even further behind people his age. He had a timeline to keep, so he stood there, silently listening as the teacher tried tearing down Izuku's shields, bit by bit. By the time Izuku was finally allowed to leave, he had cuts inside his mouth. The metallic tang of blood filled his mouth and coated his teeth. He left the school spitting a gob of blood on the ground. He would have to find some water and wash his mouth out as best he could before having to go to work. He was positive that greeting customers with bloody smile would get him kicked out instantly. Movement out of the corner of his eye put Izuku on alert. He whipped his head to the side, instantly on guard. Furious ruby eyes, framed by spiky blonde hair, met his. He should have been surprised that Bakugou Katsuki had waited for him, but he wasn't. They had grown up together. Izuku had even called him Kachan at one point, but not anymore. Not since they were 4 and Bakugou had decided Izuku made a better punching bag than friend. Even now, the sight of Bakugou set Izuku's fight or flight responses soaring. His heart rate and respirations dramatically increased, attempting to provide his body with more oxygen to make his escape. "You're giving up? That's it? You're done?" Bakugou yelled. Izuku's muscles tensed up, preparing to bolt. Running didn't always work, but it was the only option Izuku had today. "Why do you care?" Izuku stuttered. It's not like you wanted me to go to UA anyway. I changed it because I was afraid you would kill me if I showed up." Not exactly a lie. Izuku was positive that if Bakugou saw him at the entrance exams, he would attempt to kill him, and Izuku was not 100% sure that anyone there would stop him. But Izuku was not going to antagonize Bakugou by telling him Izuku had other options. Bakugou crouched down with his hands out and palm up. Sparks and pops jumped from his hands. The memories of those hands burned their way to the front of his mind. He flinched back. "You're damn right I would, Deku," Bakugou screamed. "I don't understand," he said clearly, devoid of any stutter. "Why are you okay with this?" Izuku couldn't stop his mouth even if he tried. His shields were breaking. He had had enough of being treated like this. He just wanted to defend himself for once, to talk back, and so he did. "I'm quirkless. I can't be a villain. That makes me a civilian. And you call yourself a hero." Izuku's voice rose with each syllable until finally he was screaming, "I am afraid of you! Genuinely afraid that you would kill me for doing nothing more than going to school." Tears of frustration pooled in Izuku's eyes and poured down his cheeks. What kind of hero has civilians scared of them? Civilians aren't even scared of Endeavor, the hero with the most civilian casualties, because they know he doesn't go after them on purpose. He's just neglectful. But you? You would purposefully stalk and murder a civilian just because they were trying to get a better education, a better life, because they want to help people. Izuku's throat closed up. He coughed, trying to clear it. He couldn't remember the last time he screamed like that. Maybe he never had, if the pain in his throat was anything to go by. Bakugou stood there, no longer crouched, hands lying still and silent at his sides. His eyes were wide and mouth slightly opened. Izuku took his silence as an opportunity to flee. He didn't want to be around Bakugou for any longer than absolutely necessary. Izuku ran to the cafe. When he got to the block, he ducked into the alley behind the cafe, hands on his knees and breath heaving. He checked the time on his phone. Between the teacher holding him back and the interaction with Bakugou, had he decided to wait, he would have definitely been late. As it stood, he had 5 minutes before his shift was scheduled to start. He would barely have enough time to clean up. He entered the back door to the cafe and went to the employee restroom next door to the office. He looked in the mirror above the sink. He looked horrible. He was sweaty and had flecks of blood decorating his lips. First things first, Izuku turned on the sink and used his hands to pool some water. He slurped it out of his palms and swished it around his mouth and spit it out. He repeated this until the water came out clear. Then he quickly took off his school jacket and white shirt, then redressed using a white shirt he kept in his bag. His uniform had been dirtied or damaged more than once. If his uniform wasn't spotless, it was detention for him, so he had taken to carrying 1 or 2 shirts around with him. Once redressed, Izuku deemed himself presentable at the least and left the bathroom. "So, it looks like you showed up," Boss said, looking at her watch. "And just in time, too. It looks like you get to stick around after all." Boss walks over to the hooks next to the back door and pulls a white apron off the hook. "You can hang up your bag there. Put on this apron and head up front." Izuku follows her instructions and walks to the front of the cafe. Once there, Boss quickly shows Izuku how to run the register and where supplies are located. "Remember, you are not to go out front. You are to stay behind the counter. If I see you take 1 step, you are done. Gone." Izuku nodded. Boss gave him a suspicious glare and left for the kitchen. Izuku had smelled the sweetness coming from the kitchen. He assumed it was pastries for the after-school crowd. He had seen groups of friends going to small restaurants or cafes like this after school, but had never actually been a part of the custom. Jiro was working again that day. Izuku saw her take a glance at his shoes, recognition in her eyes. Izuku went on the defensive, ready to take whatever was going to be thrown at him. "So, you want to learn how to make a drink?" she asked. Izuku nearly stumbled in shock. He knows that she knows he's quirkless, but he didn't know why she wasn't saying anything. Jiro continued speaking in his silence. "We are allowed 1 free drink per shift. I haven't made mine yet, so if you want, you can make both of ours and learn how to use the machines." "Yeah, that sounds good," Izuku says slowly. He walked to the machine. Jiro showed him how to grind the beans, measure out the grounds, and where the cafe's recipe book was. After shifting through the recipes, Izuku decided he wanted a caramel macchiato. He didn't often get sweets, and even though he was supposed to be eating healthier, decided this wasn't going to be enough to throw him off his diet, especially if he only made himself a small serving. Jiro chose an Americano for that day. She mentioned she preferred sweets that were a little more bitter. Izuku scrunched his nose up. "Why haven't you said anything about my shoes yet?" Izuku asked quietly while following the directions in the recipe book. He glanced back and forth from the machine a few times, making sure he wasn't forgetting something. "What's there to say? You're quirkless. That's all there is to it," she replied. Izuku didn't understand. No one ever just ignored his quirklessness, but that is exactly what Jiro was doing. Izuku didn't like her answer. He didn't understand it. He didn't trust it. Jiro must have seen the doubt in Izuku's features because she explained further, "My father is quirkless." Izuku whipped his head around to her, nearly spilling his coffee. "What?" he asked quietly in disbelief. "My dad's quirkless. He composes music for a living. My mom is a musician, so they work together. My dad writes and my mom sings, and they've become pretty popular and make a decent living doing what they love." Jiro smiled at Izuku. "They are the ones who taught me that quirkless people can do anything they put their minds to." Izuku teared up for a second time that day. He rubbed his eyes against the fabric on his shoulder, trying to dry up his eyes. After a little sniff and a deep breath, he composed himself. He smiled back at her. "Thank you," he said sincerely. Izuku finished their drinks just in time for the after-school rush to start. He smiled at his first customer, ready to take his first step towards his dream.